Will he be able to use Rob Reiner's fortune to defend himself with this very fancy lawyer against charges that he killed his own dad? Did Rob and Michelle keep him in their will?
Will he be able to use Rob Reiner's fortune to defend himself with this very fancy lawyer against charges that he killed his own dad? Did Rob and Michelle keep him in their will? On January 7th, all eyes will be locked on one courtroom where Nick Reiner faces trial for the tragic loss of his parents. The case has drawn massive attention, with defense attorney Alan Jackson stepping into the spotlight. Many believe he's the only one who could possibly shift the outcome of a case that already feels sealed. Mental illness stands as the centerpiece of the defense. Yet, the prosecution is prepared to challenge every angle with sharp and relentless questions. If Nick was truly unstable, how did he manage to leave the scene, drive away, and even stop at a gas station afterward? That single detail cracks open a web of new theories, claims of self-defense, the influence of outside forces, or maybe even a legal twist no one saw coming. The biggest question now: can any of these strategies save him from a lifetime behind bars? Or will one move change everything in an instant? This trial is shaping up to be a legal labyrinth where every decision carries immense weight. On one end, a possible life sentence; on the other, full acquit on grounds of mental instability. The defense's goal is clear: to convince the jury that in that moment, Nick had completely lost control of his mind and actions. If the attorney and medical experts can show he didn't understand what he was doing, the entire foundation of criminal responsibility could begin to crumble. Some defendants in similar cases choose to admit guilt right away, skipping straight to debates over mental capacity or punishment, especially when the ultimate sentence looms overhead. It's a cold strategic move made purely to protect the one thing that still matters: life itself. But even then, claiming insanity is an uphill battle, rarely successful. And in California, it's nearly impossible. To make their case, Nick's defense team must paint a picture of his mind not as suddenly broken. Speaking of Rob, he turned back to the table. It was very hard. The number one job of any parent is to keep their child safe. And I hadn't done that. He was almost tearing up. And now here, I have done that. I kept him safe. He came out alive. And the writer adds, here in 2025, the words kept ricocheting through my brain. Yes, Nick had come out alive. It was Rob that hadn't. Oh my God. But as a storm that had been raging for years before that tragic day, they can't simply say he had issues. They must show a clear pattern. A long record of mental struggles, hospital visits, and antipsychotic treatments that trace back to a deeper ongoing illness. Every doctor's note, every shift in medication, every moment he lost touch with reality becomes a crucial piece of proof that Nick's mind wasn't working like that of a stable person. Even if the jury accepts that Nick knew what he was doing, there's an even riskier argument ahead, proving that he didn't understand that what he did was wrong. This is where psychiatry collides with heartbreak. In moments of psychosis, a person may act not out of cruelty, but because they truly believe their actions are necessary or even protective. If Nick genuinely thought in his distorted state of mind that he was defending himself or stopping something worse from happening, then legally his sense of right and wrong no longer matched the world around him. Forensic psychiatrists will have to take the stand and do more than read from medical charts. They'll need to bring the jury inside a disturbed mind, explaining how hallucinations twist reality, how delusions turn fear into perceived truth, and how that fragile mental break connects directly to what happened. Without that link, every medical record just becomes a tragic backdrop, emotionally heavy, but not enough to save him from a harsh sentence. Meanwhile, the prosecution won't back down. Reads as follows. Reiner was all about sorting through the complexity of parents and offspring and coming out okay on the other side. He's the one who taught us how hard it was, but that we could get through it just as he did with his own famous father with whom he had bonded over baseball. He just couldn't enact the lesson with his own son. They'll zoom in on what Nick did after the incident, his movements, his decisions, his calmness. Proving someone is legally insane is already one of the hardest things to do. And in this case, it's even more complicated. Reports from sources like the Los Angeles Times and KBC state that Nick Reiner was receiving treatment for schizophrenia at the time of the tragedy. On paper, that sounds like a major point for the defense. But in the courtroom, a medical diagnosis alone isn't a free pass. It doesn't automatically prove legal insanity. Things get even murkier when you factor in the surveillance footage. Cameras captured a man believed to be Nick calmly walking through a gas station. His demeanor eerily composed. No panic, no confusion, no breakdown. If this really was him, moments after the tragedy, that calm sends chills down the spine. But it also sparks a disturbing question. Was this composure a symptom of psychosis or the cold awareness of someone who knew exactly what he'd done? It's a haunting paradox. We often imagine that after such an act, a person would completely unravel. Yet, history shows that some of the most shocking offenders remain unsettlingly calm afterward. An image that blurs the fragile line between madness and control. Emotional emptiness alone doesn't prove legal insanity. Take the case of Brian Bergerer. He showed almost no emotion during his entire trial, yet still received a life sentence. By the same logic, if someone is calm enough to drive, stop for gas, buy items, and pay for them, it's difficult to claim they didn't understand the difference between right and wrong. The law doesn't judge the mind by how strange someone seems, but by whether they can make clear, deliberate choices. And those choices, no matter how cold. At the dinner, we pushed back our chairs and stood up. Rob looked at me. He took my hand and clasped it. "Thank you, Steve." Perhaps I imagined it, but in his eyes I saw a pleading, an ask. Not to conceal anything, more the opposite. He wanted this story written in a way that willed the best outcome into being. I clashed his hand back as he held my gaze an extra twinkly plaintive second. It was the last interaction we had. I still feel my palm squeezed. Our still choices. Details like Nick renting a hotel room in Santa Monica that same morning raise eyebrows. Why would someone who lived at home suddenly need a hotel? Reports also mention signs of cleanup at the scene, blood wiped away, items rearranged. Those actions show a level of organization and awareness rarely compatible with a true insanity claim. And what about his behavior at Conan O'Brien's house party the night before? Some called it strange, odd questions, heated arguments. But odd isn't the same as insane. Recognizing people, knowing who's famous, arguing with parents, and then leaving the room all point to clear awareness of what's happening. If witnesses testify that Nick seemed unusual yet coherent, that could completely undercut the insanity defense. The law draws a harsh line. You can be unpredictable, erratic, even unstable. But if you still know what you're doing and that it's wrong, legal insanity is off the table. Despite how powerful an insanity plea may sound, it almost never delivers the expected results. Not because the law rejects it outright, but because the bar for proof is incredibly high. With the current facts, it's hard to believe that will be the defense's winning card. So, what's next? The second possibility is involuntary intoxication. A defense. That's less dramatic, but far more practical. This approach doesn't require showing total loss of moral understanding, only that the person's mental state was altered by something beyond their control, like being unknowingly drugged or having a reaction to medication. Under California law, involuntary intoxication can carry the same legal weight as insanity, meaning a full acquit or a major reduction in charges. But to use it, the defense must prove Nick was under the influence of a substance he didn't choose or consent to take. Maybe someone tampered with his drink at that party. Maybe his prescription medication mixed dangerously with alcohol. The team will have to dig into every detail. Who poured the drinks? What was mixed? And whether anyone noticed something suspicious. If Nick's body or mind reacted in ways he couldn't foresee, that could form the backbone of this defense. It might sound dramatic, but it's not unheard of in legal circles. People have walked free before when it was proven their judgment was stolen from them by something slipped into their system. However, it's a fragile line. If someone knowingly uses substances, even mild ones, and the result spirals out of control, the law usually considers that voluntary. But if a person drinks something innocent, like a regular beverage, and it's secretly altered, that changes everything. If neither the insanity nor intoxication defenses hold, Alan Jackson's team may aim for a third path, charge reduction. Instead of trying to erase guilt, they could fight to downgrade the severity, arguing that mental instability or impaired perception prevented clear, calculated intent. If the jury agrees that Nick didn't form a deliberate plan, the charge could drop from first degree to secondary. That shift changes everything. First-degree convictions often mean life without parole. But second-degree opens a small fragile door, 15 years to life with a chance of parole somewhere down the road. It's not freedom, but it's a future. That's why in a case this extreme, every possible defense, no matter how risky, is being examined to the very last detail. In California law, the fine line between first and second-degree murder comes down to one critical element: premeditation. It's about time, clarity, and intent. The ability to think, decide, and then act. For the prosecution to win, they'll have to prove that Nick had enough awareness to form a deliberate plan to end his parents' lives. The defense, however, will work to dismantle that idea piece by piece, arguing that this wasn't a carefully thought-out act, but a sudden emotional collapse, a mental and emotional breakdown that spiraled out of control. The strategy here is familiar. Admit the act but deny premeditation. It's no longer about whether Nick did it, but why he did it. The focus shifts from complete insanity to an absence of deliberate intent. A moment of impulsive chaos where everything unraveled in seconds. A door opens, tempers flare, perception warps, and reason disappears. If evidence of intoxication doesn't hold up, the defense may pivot to the claim of an acute psychotic episode. In that version, Nick's schizophrenia wouldn't excuse the act, but it would explain it. He wasn't plotting anything. He was reacting, consumed by delusion and confusion. Another key element in this defense could be the argument that broke out between Nick and his father at Conan O'Brien's Christmas party just hours before the tragedy. The defense might frame this as emotional provocation, a spark that triggered an uncontrollable outburst rather than a calculated decision. But the prosecution will build their own version of that night's story, connecting each moment like stepping stones. The heated exchange, the lingering resentment, the drive home, and finally entering the bedroom armed with a knife. In California courts, just returning with a weapon after a confrontation can be enough to imply intent. That's why the defense must convince the jury that the argument had already ended, that what happened later was completely separate, not driven by revenge or planning. They'll argue that Nick didn't bring the weapon in advance, didn't return to finish anything, and that his actions, though tragic, were purely impulsive. If that argument holds, the likely result could be a conviction for second-degree murder. Not freedom, but a much lighter fate than life without parole. It's a narrow path, yet it offers a sliver of hope, one that a first-degree charge would completely erase. Another theoretical but distant option is self-defense. It's rarely successful in such cases, but the defense may still raise it. If accepted, it could mean either acquittal or a reduction to voluntary manslaughter committed in the heat of passion. But to succeed, the defense must prove one key thing, that Nick genuinely believed he was in immediate danger. California law recognizes two types of self-defense. Perfect self-defense means a reasonable belief that your life is in immediate danger. Imperfect self-defense means an honest belief, even if unreasonable, that danger was present, which can downgrade the charge to manslaughter. Here, Nick's mental health could play a role, suggesting his perception of danger was warped, but convincing a jury of that will be incredibly tough. The main hurdle is the concept of imminent threat. Not general fear, not long-term tension, but a real immediate risk at that exact moment. And in a family setting, this becomes even more difficult. Courts are skeptical when someone claims their parents posed a deadly threat. So, the defense would need clear, concrete signs, physical aggression, visible weapons, or verbal threats strong enough to justify immediate fear. Then comes the second challenge, reasonableness. It's not just about whether Nick believed he was in danger, but whether a normal person in that same moment would have believed it, too. If there's no proof of an active attack, or if the threat had already passed, it's nearly impossible for a jury to see that belief as reasonable, no matter how terrified or unstable Nick might have been. The third key element in any self-defense claim is necessity and proportionality. And this is where things get extremely tough for the defense. The law makes it clear that self-defense isn't retaliation. It can't go beyond what's needed to stop an immediate threat, and it must end the moment that threat is gone. So, Nick's team has to prove that his actions didn't exceed what was necessary, and that in that split second, there was truly no other less violent way to protect himself. But here's the problem. The scene itself works against that claim. The huge age difference between Nick and his parents, the fact that they were unarmed, the quiet bedroom setting late at night, and the number of injuries all make the self-defense argument a near impossible sell before a jury. Each of these factors piles on like bricks, forming a towering wall that the defense has to somehow climb under the unblinking eye of the law. What's been hinted at in medical and forensic reports paints an even darker picture. Multiple stab wounds delivered with shocking intensity. Some unverified reports even suggest wounds to the throat. And if proven true, that alone could completely destroy any chance of a self-defense claim. Because in the eyes of the court, self-defense doesn't look like a prolonged attack. It's meant to stop danger, not extend it. The crime scene itself tells a haunting story. A master bedroom, once a symbol of safety and family, turned into chaos and bloodshed. The fact that Nick entered that room late at night undermines the idea of immediate threat and instead suggests initiative, a tragic decision made before that door even opened. If the defense goes down this path, Nick himself would likely have to testify. In cases like this, silence is almost guaranteed failure. But speaking carries huge risks. Every word could be dissected by the prosecution. Every hesitation could be twisted. One wrong answer could cut deeper than any knife. Now comes the fifth possible defense route, using Nick's history of mental illness and substance abuse, not to erase guilt, but to reduce punishment. This approach is quieter, more pragmatic, and often more effective when the evidence is too strong for full acquit. The idea is simple. Show that Nick's life was a long battle with conditions that clouded his judgment, proving he was deeply impaired when everything fell apart. A judge has the power to look at the whole picture. The medical diagnosis, psychiatric relapses, failed treatments, and uncontrollable spirals. Substance abuse on its own rarely moves a jury. But when paired with a serious mental illness like schizophrenia, it becomes a compelling argument that Nick lacked the mental capacity to fully understand or plan his actions. Alan Jackson, a skilled defense attorney, can use this approach at the sentencing stage to seek mercy. If Nick is convicted of first-degree murder, his long medical record could persuade the court to remove the life without parole penalty and instead allow for parole after 15 or 20 years. In some cases, such evidence even leads prosecutors to downgrade charges to voluntary manslaughter or to step away from pursuing harsher penalties altogether. A strong defense team would prepare a mitigation packet, a thick stack of evidence showing Nick's long-term treatment history at specialized psychiatric facilities, reports from doctors about recent medication changes, and documentation of erratic or dangerous behavior just weeks before the tragedy. These records would aim to paint Nick not as a monster, but as a man overtaken by an illness no one could control. This argument can also open doors for negotiation. Since more than 95% of California criminal cases end with plea deals, the defense could use this combination of medical evidence and family background to persuade District Attorney Nathan Hawkman to lower the charges or drop aggravating factors. Finally, combining schizophrenia with substance dependence builds one consistent theme: no premeditated intent. That claim alone could shift the charge from first degree to secondary, changing Nick's entire future. Because while first degree means a lifetime locked away, second degree still holds a narrow, fragile window of hope, a chance for parole, and someday redemption. In the worst-case scenario, if Nick Reiner is convicted and the case moves to sentencing, the courtroom will shift from accusation to analysis. Psychiatrists will take the stand to explain in calm but heavy detail how years of substance abuse intensified his schizophrenia, creating a storm that led to a sudden, uncontrollable break from reality. An act born not from hate, but from confusion and chaos. This line of defense doesn't erase guilt, but it seeks mercy. When a person loses control of their mind, the law allows judges to look beyond punishment and into humanity itself. Nick's legal team knows that if they can prove the act was not driven by cruelty, but by the worsening of a mental illness, they can pull the sentence back from its harshest edge. And that argument can work, especially since Nick has no prior record of violent crimes. He's not a career offender, not a danger that walked freely for years. He's a man whose mental health deteriorated faster than anyone could manage. And the evidence of that long decline is everywhere. 4 years, his parents had been his foundation. They didn't abandon him. They fought for him. They took him to rehab after rehab, found doctors, encouraged therapy, and even created a film based on his life story to raise awareness about addiction and mental illness. That project was supposed to be a message of hope, a warning that addiction and psychosis can destroy a person if left untreated. Tragically, it became a prophecy. For the defense, these facts serve a bigger purpose. They humanize Nick. In court, the prosecution paints a cold picture. A man who acted with precision, not panic. But the defense needs to tear that image apart and replace it with something raw and real, a man lost in the storm of his own mind. They'll want the jury to see him as someone sick, desperate, addicted, and trapped in cycles of self-destruction that no amount of love could fix. This doesn't mean begging for forgiveness. It means demanding understanding. It means forcing the court to see the difference between a heartless criminal and a broken person whose illness turned inward, destroying the very people who were trying to save him. Still, there's a brutal truth the defense cannot escape. If the charge remains first-degree murder with special circumstances, all doors to leniency slam shut. In California, that charge means automatic life without parole, no matter how tragic the backstory may be. But if that label can be avoided, even by a thread, there's a chance, no matter how small, to present Nick as a fragile man, not an irredeemable monster. That's why Alan Jackson's team might also pursue another legal angle, attacking the prosecution's evidence directly. It's a colder, more technical strategy, but in some cases, it's the one that actually saves lives. In this approach, the defense doesn't have to prove Nick is innocent. They only have to show that the state's evidence can't be trusted. Because in the world of law, doubt is power. Alan Jackson has a reputation for being fearless when it comes to confronting law enforcement. He's done it before, challenging police reports, exposing mishandled evidence, and tearing apart sloppy investigative work. If he can find even one procedural error, one illegal search, one piece of evidence collected outside proper protocol, the court could strike it out completely. When evidence collapses, so does the foundation of the case. It's a tactic that's turned impossible cases upside down before. Defense lawyers have flipped verdicts by showing that evidence was gathered without warrants, that witnesses were coerced, or that police cut corners during high-pressure investigations. And under the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, any evidence obtained unlawfully can be thrown out instantly. In a case like this, every technicality counts because once reasonable doubt is created, the entire narrative begins to crack. But right now, everything about the prosecution's evidence remains hidden from public view. The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office has confirmed that the key forensic materials, digital timelines, DNA analysis, phone data, and any security footage will only be revealed during trial. Until then, both the media and the public are working in the dark. Rumors swirl, but facts are locked tight. Still, the defense isn't sitting idle. They'll likely file multiple motions before trial, requests to suppress evidence, demands for clarity on lab reports, and possibly subpoenas, calling investigators from the LAPD to testify. Even respected departments can make mistakes under pressure. And in Los Angeles, the LAPD's record has seen its fair share of controversy over the years. Mistakes happen, even in the most high-profile cases. Alan Jackson knows this all too well, and he's not afraid to use it. If he finds inconsistencies in police procedures, unclear evidence chains, or digital data that doesn't perfectly align with the timeline, he'll hammer at it relentlessly because in front of a jury, every shadow of uncertainty counts. Yet, the reality remains heavy. The prosecution's silence feels deliberate. It suggests confidence. They likely believe their evidence is airtight. The weapon, the blood patterns, the timeline, maybe even surveillance that fills in the gaps between the house, the gas station, and the hotel. Nothing's been shown yet, but when that curtain lifts on January 7th, the defense will be forced to face the full picture for the first time. Now, there's another far less realistic strategy that occasionally surfaces in desperate moments. Blaming someone else. In California, even suggesting another possible suspect without naming them can sometimes plant just enough doubt to sway a jury. The rule is simple. If the defense can show that someone else might have done it, even faintly, they can argue for reasonable doubt. But this particular case doesn't make that easy. There are no signs of forced entry. The doors were locked. The house showed no disturbance from outside. And the tragedy happened in the parents' bedroom late at night when strangers would have had no access. Nick lived nearby close enough to be immediately connected to the scene. To convince a jury that a mystery intruder managed to sneak in, commit a violent act, and vanish without a trace would be nearly impossible. And then there's Nick's own behavior afterward. Leaving the house, driving off, stopping at a gas station, calmly buying water, then checking into a hotel using his own credit card. These are deliberate actions, not the panicked reactions of someone who stumbled upon a crime scene. The prosecution will surely argue that such composure reveals consciousness of guilt. Every piece of evidence so far, his presence at the home, his escape, his silence, builds toward one narrative, that Nick acted alone. The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office has made it clear that this case focuses solely on him as the perpetrator. There's been no mention of another suspect. No witness testimony suggesting anyone else was involved. No foreign DNA. Even the soft blame version of this defense claiming that someone manipulated or influenced Nick faces steep challenges. To use that argument, the defense must provide actual proof that another person's actions directly contributed to Nick's mental collapse or his impaired judgment that night. Without concrete evidence, messages, witnesses, or toxicology results pointing to an external hand, it remains an abstract theory easily dismissed in court. So, while blaming someone else might sound like a clever trick on paper, in reality, it's a fragile play that often falls apart the moment the prosecution starts asking hard questions. That leaves the defense with the most human, most realistic road, mitigation and mercy. This is where the emotional side of the case takes center stage. The lawyers will show the jury every painful chapter of Nick's story. His years of struggle, his parents' endless efforts to save him, the medical records showing repeated medication changes, and the decline that everyone saw but couldn't stop. They'll argue that this was the breaking point of a man who'd already fallen apart long before that night. That behind the tragedy is a person who was never free from his own mind and a family that tried everything to bring him back. Because ultimately, that's what this case really is. A heartbreaking family collapse where there are no winners. The defense knows the jury won't easily forget the horror of the crime, but they'll try to plan a different kind of truth. That mental illness can destroy even the most loving families from the inside out. So, when the jury sits down to deliberate, their task won't just be to decide guilt. It will be to decide intent. Was this an act of evil or a tragedy born from sickness? Did Nick plan what happened or did he fall victim to his own mind? Every legal strategy, insanity, intoxication, provocation, self-defense, or mitigation, circles this same question. Was Nick Reiner acting with purpose, or did his perception of reality shatter beyond repair? The judge will look at the law, the jury will look at the evidence, and the public will watch with divided hearts. Some will see a criminal deserving punishment. Others will see a patient who lost his final battle against himself. As January 7th approaches, Los Angeles waits for the truth. Or at least the version of it that survives the courtroom. But in the end, no matter what the verdict is, one thing remains painfully clear. This story is not just about a crime. It's about the fragile border between mental illness and responsibility, between love and tragedy, between justice and mercy. And sometimes those lines blur so deeply that no one, not even the law, can draw them cleanly again. So, what do you think? Is this the story of a cold-minded act or a desperate breakdown that spiraled into disaster? Which defense strategy feels strongest to you, and which feels doomed to fail? If you were sitting on that jury, how would you read the evidence? Let me know your thoughts down below. This is one of those cases where everyone sees something different. And if this deep dive made you think, don't forget to hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more analyses that dig beneath the headlines. Leave a comment with your take. Was this premeditation or mental collapse beyond control?